When my husband, Mark, and I first moved into our cozy little house in Willow Heights, we thought we were stepping into a storybook version of suburban life. The streets were lined with tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze, casting dappled shadows on the perfectly paved roads. Neighbors waved warmly as they walked their dogs or pushed strollers down the sidewalks. There was even a small park at the end of the street where kids laughed and played on swings while parents chatted on benches nearby. It felt like the kind of place where memories were made, where summers stretched endlessly and winters brought hot cocoa and twinkling lights. Our new home wasn't huge or fancy, but it was ours. Every corner seemed to hold promise. The living room had just enough space for a couch and a TV, and the tiny backyard already felt like a blank canvas waiting for flower beds and maybe even a vegetable garden. As we unpacked boxes filled in with dishes, books, and framed photos, I couldn't help but imagine all the moments we'd share here. Birthday parties, lazy Sunday mornings, quiet evenings under the stars. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. But then, reality knocked, or rather, it arrived in the form of a crisp white envelope slipped under our front door. At first glance, it looked innocent enough, almost official. The words Willow Heights Homeowners Association were printed boldly across the top in elegant script. Inside, though, was anything but welcoming. Page after page detailed rules. So many rules that I started to wonder if we'd accidentally signed up for military training instead of homeownership. No lawn ornaments without prior approval. Specific colors allowed for front doors. No bright reds, no yellows. Even guidelines on how often we needed to trim our hedges. It was overwhelming. Mark tried to reassure me. "It's probably not a big deal," he said, flipping through the pages casually. "People just like things to look nice around here." But deep down, I knew better. Rules like these weren't about keeping things tidy. They were about control. And something about them made my stomach twist uncomfortably. The unease grew when we met Karen. She introduced herself during our second week in the neighborhood, showing up unannounced with a clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes pressed within an inch of their lives, and her smile, well, let's just say it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi there," she chirped, her voice dripping with forced cheerfulness. "I'm Karen, your friendly HOA representative. I noticed you haven't joined yet." Joined? What did that even mean? Mark politely explained that we hadn't really thought about joining because, honestly, we didn't have the extra money right now. Karen's smile faltered for a split second before snapping back into place. "Oh well, unfortunately, participation isn't optional," she said sweetly, though her tone carried an unmistakable edge. "You'll need to fill out these forms by Monday." We nodded politely, thanked her, and closed the door behind her. Once she was gone, Mark turned to me and raised an eyebrow. "Do you think she's serious?" he asked. I shrugged, unsure. But as the days passed, it became clear that Karen wasn't messing around. Notes began appearing on our porch, reminding us of deadlines and warning us about potential fines. Each one felt like another weight pressing down on us, turning what should have been a fresh start into something suffocating. Looking back, I realized that moment, the arrival of that envelope, was the beginning of everything. Little did we know, Karen and her obsession with rules would soon become the center of our lives, testing our patience, our sanity, and ultimately, our resolve. Karen wasn't just a neighbor, she was a force of nature. From the moment she introduced herself, it was clear that she had no intention of letting us slide under her radar. At first, her visits seemed almost comical. She'd show up unannounced, clipboard in hand, inspecting everything from the state of our mailbox to the color of the welcome mat we'd placed by the front door. "Oh, this is charming," she once said, tapping her pen against her lips as she studied our porch. "But I'm afraid floral patterns aren't on the approved list." Floral patterns? Really? Who even made lists like that? Mark and I exchanged glances behind her back, trying not to laugh. It was absurd, but at the same time, There was something unsettling about the way she acted, as if she believed she had the right to dictate every single detail of our lives. Her tone was always polite, her smile never wavering, but beneath it all was a coldness that sent shivers down my spine. The notes started arriving more frequently after that. Some were typed, others handwritten in perfect cursive. Each one carried the same message: comply or face consequences. One morning, I found a slip of paper taped to our garage door. Front yard grass exceeds maximum length by 0.25 inches. Please address immediately. Seriously, a quarter of an inch? How did anyone even measure that? Another time, she left a note criticizing the placement of our recycling bins. Bins must be stored out of sight when not in use, it read. Out of sight? Where exactly were we supposed to hide them? It wasn't just the notes, though. Karen's presence loomed everywhere. If we left a bike leaning against the fence for more than a day, she'd march over with a lecture about community aesthetics. When we hung a string of fairy lights along the eaves of the house during the holidays, she appeared within hours, shaking her head disapprovingly. Lights are only permitted in white or warm yellow tones, she informed us, pointing to a section of the HOA handbook we hadn't even known existed. It felt like living in a fishbowl, with Karen constantly peering in, judging every move we made. What bothered me most, though, was how isolated we began to feel. The other neighbors avoided us, too scared to get caught in Karen's crosshairs. We'd wait hello, but they'd either look away or mutter vague excuses about being busy. Even Mrs. Patel, who lived across the street and occasionally brought over homemade cookies, stopped visiting after Karen pulled her aside one afternoon for a friendly chat. Whatever was said during that conversation, it worked. Afterward, Mrs. Patel barely acknowledged us, avoiding eye contact whenever we passed each other on the sidewalk. Mark tried to stay optimistic. "She'll lose interest eventually," he said one evening as we sat on the couch, flipping through yet another letter from the HOA. But I wasn't so sure. Karen didn't strike me as someone who gave up easily. In fact, the harder we resisted, the more determined she seemed to become. It was like we'd unknowingly declared war, and she was determined to win at any cost. Things came to a head one sunny Saturday afternoon. Mark decided to relax on the front lawn with a couple of folding chairs and a cold drink. It was such a simple thing, a moment of peace after a long week. But Karen materialized out of nowhere, her golf cart screeching to a halt in front of our driveway. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing dramatically at the chairs as if they were some kind of crime scene evidence. "Front yard seating is prohibited without prior approval." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious right now?" I blurted out, stepping outside before I could stop myself. "They're lawn chairs, Karen. People sit in them. Outside. That's literally their purpose." Her face turned bright red, and for a moment I thought she might explode. Instead, she straightened her posture, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "This isn't about the chairs," she snapped, her voice rising slightly. "It's about respect for the rules. If you can't follow basic guidelines, maybe you don't belong here." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Maybe she was right. We didn't fit into her rigid, rule-bound version of paradise. But deep down, I knew we weren't the problem. This wasn't about respect or community pride. It was about control. And Karen wasn't going to let go of hers without a fight. As she drove off in her golf cart, I stood there fuming, staring at the harmless chairs that had somehow sparked such outrage. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Enough was enough. Whatever battle Karen wanted to wage, we were ready to fight back. The harassment didn't stop after the lawn chair incident. It escalated. Karen seemed to take our defiance as a personal challenge, and she wasn't about to back down. Every day brought a new complaint, a new rule we'd allegedly broken, or another passive-aggressive note slipped under our door. It was exhausting, like living under a microscope where every tiny detail of our lives was scrutinized and judged. One morning, I stepped outside to find a bright orange flyer taped to our front door. "Attention. Non-compliance notice." It read in bold letters. Apparently, our garden hose had been left coiled on the side of the house overnight, a violation of Article XII, Section C of the HOA guidelines. The penalty: a $25 fine. For a hose. I stood there staring at the paper, my hands trembling with frustration. Was this really how we were expected to live, constantly looking over our shoulders, afraid that some minor oversight would result in yet another scolding, or worse, a fine? Mark tried to reason with her, hoping to diffuse the tension. He called Karen one evening, explaining that we weren't trying to cause trouble, but simply couldn't keep up with all the rules. "It's not like we're running a junkyard out here," he said, his tone calm but firm. But Karen wasn't interested in compromise. Her voice turned icy as she replied, "Rules exist for a reason, Mark. If everyone did whatever they pleased, this neighborhood would fall apart." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they felt so unfair. We weren't neglecting our property or causing problems for anyone. Our house was clean, our yard well maintained, and our behavior respectful. Yet Karen acted as if we were criminals, deliberately undermining the sanctity of Willow Heights. It was maddening and isolating. The more Karen targeted us, the more distant our neighbors became. They avoided eye contact, crossed the street when they saw us coming, or whispered behind closed doors. It was as if Karen had convinced them that associating with us carried some kind of social stigma. But what hurt most was the toll it took on our family. Mark and I started arguing more often, the stress spilling over into our relationship. Late at night, we'd lie awake, replaying conversations with Karen or debating whether it was worth fighting back. Should we give in and pay the ridiculous fees just to make her leave us alone? Or should we stand our ground, even if it meant becoming pariahs in our own neighborhood? There were days when I wanted to throw in the towel, pack up, and move somewhere less suffocating. But then I'd look around at our little home, the cozy living room, the backyard where we dreamed of planting flowers, and realize I didn't want to let Karen win. The breaking point came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Mark and I had decided to host a small barbecue for a few close friends. It wasn't anything fancy, just burgers, chips, and some music playing softly in the background. But Karen must have heard the laughter from her house, because within minutes she appeared at our gate, clipboard in hand. She didn't bother pretending to be friendly this time. "I'm sorry," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "but outdoor gatherings require prior approval. This is a direct violation of HOA policy." I couldn't believe it. A barbecue? Really? One of our guests, Lisa, stepped forward, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Are you serious right now?" she asked, glancing between Karen and us. Karen simply nodded, her expression smug. "I'm afraid so. Rules are rules." That was the moment everything changed. As Karen turned and walked away, I felt something inside me snap. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about power. She thrived on making people feel small, powerless, unworthy, and I refused to let her do that to us any longer. After the party ended, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by empty plates and half-empty soda cans. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "We can't keep living like this," he said quietly. "She's not going to stop unless we make her." He was right. It was time to fight back, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else who had been too scared to stand up to Karen. Whatever happened next, we knew one thing for sure: we wouldn't back down without a fight. The decision to fight back wasn't made lightly. For weeks, Mark and I debated our options late into the night, weighing the risks and rewards of taking on Karen and the HOA. On one hand, we knew standing up to her could make things worse. She might retaliate, escalate her harassment, or even try to involve legal authorities. On the other hand, staying silent felt like surrendering a piece of ourselves. We didn't want to live in fear anymore. So we decided to dig deeper, to arm ourselves with knowledge and allies. Our first step was research. I spent hours online, poring over documents about homeowners associations and their legal limitations, What I discovered shocked me. Many HOAs operated on shaky ground when it came to enforcing rules, especially if those rules weren't explicitly outlined in property deeds or contracts. In our case, the Willow Heights HOA's mandatory membership policy wasn't legally binding unless it had been clearly stated when we purchased the house. And guess what? It hadn't been. Armed with this information, I began reaching out to other neighbors discreetly. At first, I was nervous. I didn't know who might side with Karen or report me to her. But as I knocked on doors and shared my findings, I realized we weren't alone. Almost everyone I spoke to had a story about Karen's overreach. Fines for minor infractions, unreasonable demands, or outright bullying. Mr. Alvarez, an elderly man who lived 3 houses down, told me he'd been fined for planting tomatoes in his backyard instead of flowers because Karen deemed them unsightly. Sarah, a young mom across the street, confessed she paid hundreds in unnecessary fees out of fear of retaliation. Even quiet Mrs. Thompson admitted she'd stopped decorating her porch for holidays after Karen criticized her choice of wreaths. Each conversation fueled my determination. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a larger problem. Karen's obsession with control wasn't just annoying. It was toxic. Slowly, a coalition began to form. Neighbors started meeting secretly in basements and backyards, sharing evidence of Karen's behavior and strategizing ways to hold her accountable. Some suggested filing formal complaints with local authorities, while others proposed organizing a petition to reform, or even dissolve, the HOA altogether. Meanwhile, Karen seemed oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. She continued her patrols in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, issuing warnings and nitpicking every detail of our lives. One day, she left yet another note on our porch, this time complaining that our mailbox flag was angled too sharply upward. I stared at the paper, shaking my head in disbelief. How could someone care so much about something so trivial? It was almost laughable, if it weren't so infuriating. But the tension reached a boiling point when Karen crossed a line none of us expected. One evening, as Mark and I relaxed on the front porch with a couple of folding chairs, yes, the same ones she hated, we heard sirens blaring in the distance. Moments later, a police car pulled up to our curb. 2 officers stepped out, looking both confused and slightly embarrassed. We received a call about a suspicious activity involving lawn furniture, one of them said, glancing awkwardly at our chairs. It took everything in me not to scream. Suspicious activity. Over lawn chairs. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. Does this have anything to do with Karen? I asked pointedly. The officers hesitated before nodding. She mentioned there might be some kind of disturbance, one of them admitted. After confirming we weren't causing any harm, they left with apologetic shrugs. But the damage was done. Karen had gone too far this time. That night, sitting at the kitchen table with Mark, I felt a mix of anger and resolve bubbling inside me. This wasn't just about lawn chairs or mailboxes or tomato plants. It was about standing up for ourselves and reclaiming our sense of dignity. We weren't going to let Karen bully us anymore. Whatever happened next, we were ready to face it together. The morning after the police visit, I woke up with a fire in my chest that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just anger, it was determination. Karen had gone too far this time, and I knew we couldn't let her get away with it. The absurdity of calling 911 over lawn chairs wasn't just petty. It was a clear sign of how far she'd go to assert her control. This wasn't about rules or community pride anymore. It was about power, and it was time to take that power back. Mark and I sat down at the kitchen table with coffee and notebooks, mapping out our next steps. We decided to escalate things publicly, but carefully. Our plan was simple yet bold. Gather as much evidence as possible. Photos, screenshots, witness testimonies, and present it all at the next HOA meeting. But we didn't want to stop there. We also drafted a formal complaint letter outlining Karen's behavior and sent copies to every resident in Willow Heights, not just the board members, but everyone. If Karen thrived on secrecy and fear, we were going to bring everything into the light. Writing the letter was cathartic. For the first time since moving here, I felt like I had a voice. I detailed every instance of harassment, the endless notes about trivial violations, the personal attacks during backyard barbecues, the baseless 911 call over lawn chairs. I included screenshots of texts where Karen berated us for minor infractions and photos of her golf cart parked suspiciously outside our house. Most importantly, I shared the legal loophole we'd discovered about the HOA's mandatory membership policy. By the time I finished, the letter was 6 pages long, but every word mattered. When we delivered the letters to our neighbors, the response was overwhelming. People who had once avoided us now reached out privately, thanking us for speaking up. Some admitted they'd been too scared to challenge Karen, while others confessed they'd been fined unfairly but didn't know what to do. A few even offered to help, sharing their own stories and evidence. One neighbor, Mr. Patel, handed over a stack of old HOA notices he'd saved, including one where Karen criticized him for hanging laundry indoors because it looked tacky. Another, Mrs. Alvarez, forwarded an email thread showing how Karen had tried to pressure her into paying unnecessary fees. As the days passed, momentum grew. What started as a quiet rebellion turned into a full-blown movement. Neighbors began talking openly about Karen's behavior, sharing their frustrations, and brainstorming ways to hold her accountable. Some suggested reforming the HOA entirely, replacing its rigid rules with more reasonable guidelines. Others wanted to dissolve the organization altogether, arguing that it no longer served the community's best interests. Whatever the outcome, one thing was clear: Karen's reign of terror was coming to an end. Still, not everyone was supportive. A handful of residents sided with Karen, defending her actions as necessary for maintaining property values and neighborhood standards. They accused us of stirring up trouble and warned that challenging the HOA would only create chaos. At first, their criticism stung, but then I realized something. They weren't defending the community, they were defending Karen's authority. And that made me even more determined to see this through. The night before the HOA meeting, Mark and I stayed up late rehearsing what we'd say. We practiced answering tough questions, anticipating counterarguments, and presenting our case clearly and calmly. I was nervous. What if no one listened? What if Karen managed to twist things around again? But deep down, I knew we were doing the right thing. This wasn't just about us. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever felt powerless under her rule. By the time we went to bed, I felt a strange sense of peace. No matter what happened at the meeting, we'd already won in one way. We'd exposed the truth. Karen's empire of control was built on fear, and fear only worked when people stayed silent. Now, thanks to us, the silence was broken. Whatever came next, we were ready. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. Mark and I woke up early, dressed in our most presentable clothes, and reviewed our notes one last time. My stomach churned as we walked to the community center, a small, bland room that usually hosted cookie exchanges and holiday craft fairs. Today, though, it felt like a courtroom, charged with tension and unspoken grievances. When we stepped inside, the scene was surreal. The long folding tables at the front were occupied by Karen and her loyal board members, their faces stiff with forced smiles. Behind them hung a banner that read, "Welcome to Willow Heights HOA Monthly Meeting," in cheerful block letters, an ironic touch given the storm brewing in the room. Rows of chairs stretched out before them, nearly filled with neighbors who had come to witness what promised to be a showdown. Some looked curious, others nervous, and a few shot us sympathetic glances as we took our seats near the back. Karen began the meeting with her usual chipper tone, welcoming everyone and thanking them for attending. But her voice faltered slightly when she noticed the unusually large turnout. She cleared her throat and launched into her agenda, skipping quickly past mundane topics like tree trimming schedules. It was clear she wanted to wrap things up before anyone could speak out, But she wasn't going to get her way this time. One by one, people stood up to share their stories. Mr. Alvarez went first, his hands trembling as he held his notes. "I love this neighborhood," he started, his voice soft but steady. "But I can't afford these fines anymore. Last summer, I got fined $50 because my tomato plants didn't match the approved landscaping plan." Tomatoes? How does that make sense? Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and I saw several heads nodding in agreement. Next was Sarah, clutching her toddler's hand as she spoke. "I've lived here for 5 years, and every year I dread the holidays. Not because of the season, but because Karen tells me my decorations are too bright or not elegant enough. This year, I didn't put anything up at all. Is that really the kind of place we want to live in?" Each story added fuel to the fire. Mrs. Patel recounted how Karen berated her for hanging laundry indoors, calling it unsightly. Mrs. Thompson tearfully admitted she stopped inviting friends over after Karen criticized her choice of curtains. Even quieter neighbors, who rarely spoke up, found the courage to share their frustrations. Every testimony painted a picture of a community held hostage by fear and control. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The room fell silent as I placed my folder on the podium. "My name is Emily," I began, my voice shaking only slightly. "And I'm here today because I'm tired of being treated like a criminal in my own home." I told them everything. The endless notes about trivial violations, the harassment over lawn chairs, and finally, the absurd 911 call. When I mentioned the legal loophole about mandatory membership, a wave of whispers swept through the room. Karen sat frozen in her chair, her clipboard resting uselessly in her lap. For the first time, her polished facade cracked. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, but no one met her gaze. Instead, the crowd watched her with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright anger. By the time I finished speaking, the atmosphere had shifted completely. People were fired up, ready to demand change. One neighbor suggested dissolving the current HOA structure altogether, while another proposed rewriting the rules to prioritize fairness over perfection. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly realizing they were outnumbered. As the meeting drew to a close, a vote was called to either reform the HOA or disband it entirely. The decision was unanimous. Reform. Karen resigned on the spot, her face pale as she gathered her things and left without a word. As she walked out, I felt a surge of relief and vindication. We hadn't just won a battle, we'd reclaimed our neighborhood. That night, as Mark and I sat on the porch with our infamous lawn chairs, I couldn't help but smile. The fight had been exhausting, but it was worth it. Willow Heights wasn't perfect anymore, but it was ours. And that made all the difference. The days following the HOA meeting felt like stepping out of a storm and into clear skies. For the first time since moving to Willow Heights, I could breathe without feeling the weight of Karen's rules pressing down on me. The neighborhood itself seemed lighter, as if the oppressive cloud she created had finally lifted. People who once avoided us now waved warmly or stopped to chat. Mr. Alvarez even invited us over for coffee one afternoon, proudly showing off his thriving tomato plants. "They're doing great," he said with a grin. "No fines this year." Karen, unsurprisingly, disappeared from sight almost immediately after resigning. Her golf cart sat untouched in her driveway, gathering dust, and her house remained eerily quiet. Occasionally, we'd catch glimpses of her peeking through her curtains, but she never ventured outside anymore. It was strange. She'd spent so much time policing everyone else's lives that she seemed lost without it. Mark joked that maybe she'd finally found something else to obsess over, like rearranging her spice rack alphabetically. In the weeks that followed, the new HOA board got to work rewriting the guidelines. Gone were the absurd restrictions about mailbox angles, holiday lights, and laundry hanging indoors. Instead, they focused on practical issues: maintaining shared spaces, addressing safety concerns, and fostering a sense of community. Meetings became open forums where neighbors could voice their opinions without fear of judgment or retaliation. Slowly but surely, Willow Heights started to feel less like a dictatorship and more like a real neighborhood. One evening, as Mark and I sat on our porch watching the sunset, Mrs. Patel walked by with her dog. She paused at our gate, smiling shyly. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "You two really changed things around here." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Finally, I smiled back. "We couldn't have done it alone," I replied. "Everyone played a part." Mark leaned back in his chair, sipping his lemonade. "You know," he mused, "it's funny how something as small as lawn chairs turned into such a big deal." I laughed, shaking my head. "It wasn't about the chairs," I reminded him. "It was about standing up for ourselves and proving that no one gets to dictate how we live our lives." As summer rolled on, life in Willow Heights settled into a comfortable rhythm. Kids played in the streets again. Bikes lined driveways, and the park buzzed with laughter. Neighbors hosted block parties, sharing food and stories under strings of twinkling lights. Even the old bulletin board came alive with colorful flyers advertising garage sales, book clubs, and yoga classes in the park. The transformation was remarkable, not because the neighborhood looked different, but because it felt different. Looking back, I realized how much we'd grown through the experience. Standing up to Karen hadn't just been about fighting unfair rules. It had taught us resilience, courage, and the importance of community. We learned that staying silent only empowers bullies, while speaking out, even when it's scary, can inspire others to do the same. And most importantly, we discovered that home isn't just a place. It's the people who make it feel safe and welcoming. Now, when I look at those folding chairs sitting proudly on our front lawn, I don't see symbols of conflict. I see reminders of victory. They represent the moment we chose to fight back, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who deserved to live free from unnecessary control. Sure, there are still challenges ahead. No neighborhood is perfect, but at least now, we face them together. Willow Heights will always hold a special place in my heart, not because it's flawless, but because it's ours. And sometimes, that's all that matters.